Good afternoon, everyone, and hope everyone had a nice lunch. It's a pleasure for all of us to be here, and the topic of the panel is indeed very relevant for central banks. As I began preparing for this panel, I looked up some definitions and what is populism. The dictionary defines it as a political party claiming to represent the common people. That looked to me sounded very familiar and similar to democracy. Indeed, in democracies, democracy defines as government of the people. So, in democracies, indeed, politicians and civil servants are expected to represent the interests of the people. Then why are concerns about central banks and populism? We need to take a closer look, and the panel will discuss these issues. But first, the recent rise in populism did not come from nowhere. And there are reasons for that. As IMF Managing Director has said, we know there is a widely spread perception that those who caused the crisis didn't face the consequences, while ordinary people paid a heavy price. Many people actually saw this as the ultimate breach of public trust. Indeed, as we heard also today morning, trust in institutions, experts, and media is on decline. For example, the 2019 Edelman Trust Barometer shows that only 1 out of 5 people believe that the system is working for him. Other surveys show similar results. The OECD published a number of studies looking into trust issues. And trust in central banks is also affected. So with this deep and perhaps deepening distrust and dissatisfaction, populists are trying to gain political advantage by offering alternatives. Perhaps these alternatives may be better than existing policies, but it well may be that they will be worse. In fact, the true risk of populism is that economic policies have often led to high and volatile inflation and unsustainable public finances, as well as large losses in economic welfare. The solution to the related problems of declining trust in existing policies and institutions and rising populism will no doubt require both better economic policies and better communications. So, and there will be specific issues that central banks will need to address in a time of rising populism, including maintaining their independence and focus on price stability, as well as trying to be heard and believed by a broader public, also a new task for central banks. So this just gives us a flavor of the discussion we hope today right now with our panelists and with all of you. With this, let me introduce our panelists today. To my right is Miroslav Zinger. He was governor of the Czech National Bank from 2010 to 2016 after a distinguished career in central banking academia and the private sector. After leaving the Czech National Bank, yes, thank you. Welcome, Miroslav. After leaving the Czech National Bank, he became Director for Institutional Affairs and Chief Economist of Generali CEE Holding. To Miroslav's left is Emma Murphy. Emma has been the head of Content and Strategy Division in the Communications area of the Bank of England since 2014. Definitely, we see the results. Bank of England received a number of compliments today from many speakers. And as well as overseeing the bank's overall strategy, Emma's role also to lead on internal communications and all content development and production for that purpose as well. To Emma's left is Dmytro Sologub, who is deputy governor of the National Bank of Ukraine and one of the hosts of this wonderful conference. Dmytro handles a range of issues at the National Bank of Ukraine, including monetary policy, macroprudential policy, financial stability, economic analysis, and collection and analysis of statistics and reporting, and also central bank research, a wide portfolio. Prior to that, Dmytro was head of research at Raiffeisen Bank, and he also worked for some times with the IMF. Unfortunately, we lost Dmitry. Yuriy Gorodnichenko is a Quantich Presidential Professor of Economics at the University of California, Berkeley. He received his PhD from the University of Michigan in 2007, and he published numerous papers in the leading economic journals. I had troubles reviewing all of them, I have to say. Professor Gorodnichenko is also an editor of the Journal of Monetary Economics and an editor of the Vestnik of the National Bank of Ukraine. So please welcome Yuriy as well. With that, the plan for the panel is that I will ask our eminent panelists to make a few opening remarks. We will then discuss some questions that will follow, and then we'll take questions from all of you. So Miroslav, please, we welcome, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks a lot. I hope you hear me correctly. First, let me thanks to our host for invitation and for my first opportunity to enjoy the hospitality of Ukraine and this beautiful city of Kiev. I believe the title of the panel is "Ignore or Fight," which is of course a question. My answer would be probably fight and ignore, and this answer I learned from many Czech National Bank's mistakes, which were mainly of my own responsibility, I must say. I still find it peculiar that we got even some prize for communication and transparency after erring so much, but that forced us to do some reactions. Let me start from the very general point. I believe three typical ends of central bank's ability to carry out monetary or any other significant policy, because it loses all reputations and functionality as the consequences. If it leads the economy to very high inflation or hyperinflation, if it leads economy to deflation, or if it leads itself to become a politically involvement body. And I believe there are no developed countries' central banks which would do the first mistake of high inflation, but I would be very careful to say the same statement about the deflation or political involvement. In our case, we definitely were unprepared to communicate our measure when we weakened the currency, and I believe that's a consequence of several mistakes. We entered the crisis with messages and communication essentially focusing on decreasing inflationary expectation and stressing the values of low inflation, which was exactly the opposite what we needed. Second, we relied on analysts and mainstream media explaining our decision. We were not, frankly, used to do this that often. Third, we did not fully apprehend the consequences of the fact that Czech population, Czech households, have typically net positive financial assets, meaning the first order effect of any, for them, visible relaxation of monetary policy was negative for the value of those assets. And third, or the last one, we were not really comprehending the I would say the inequality of mainstream media people, which was simply due to the fact that the average salary in media was way a lot different compared with average salary in economic sector or in the society in 1995 and in 2013. Let's face it, like media people get much lower relative average salary than they did in the last decade of last millennium. So we had to fight, and we had to fight fast. Of course, we increased the amount of communication. But we also put and introduced a written statement after each monetary policy decision, which simply allowed the media with ability to copy and paste, which was definitely better than when they were attempted to transfer what we were trying to say. We were, to gain the trust back, we were simply relating ourselves a lot with trusted opinion makers, which at that time in Czech Republic were not media people or analysts and are not probably going to be. But those were industry leaders of successful firms from regions. And so we organized around panels, and we were traveling from region to meet with these people and sort of use their reputation to enhance our reputation and get it back. Famously, I believe we were the first central bank that started blogging. We used the blog in order to spread the news, and we found out that again, copy and paste works much better than trying to get an interview or article in a mainstream media. We did not fight. That's for ignorance. We definitely did not fight, and we decided intentionally not to go fighting in low-end TV or low-end press, tabloids, and similar with interviews. Those were two things. First, we didn't feel that we can spread the message at the beginning of the heat, but also we found out very soon, and we used it, that first criticism of such a measure like weakening of currency from low-end media is it's gonna to bring you a big price increases. This is the message to public people. Well, it was, honestly, it came quite handy when we were trying to increase the inflationary expectations. I mean, like media essentially took a lot of Czech consumers out of saving, and they were going to buy themselves a freezer or a car or something else. And this is the way you can, time to time, use the media as well. All right, perhaps reflecting on Cecilia's speech, I believe one can turn back on transparency. We definitely decided not to publish the voting on decision on weakening the currency, and we honestly got away with this because it's not a normal not a normal monetary policy decision like changing the interest rate. Perhaps let me end up to try to shift a little bit focus of discussions. It seemed to me in the morning a lot of discussion was about understanding. Yeah. But I believe we are not in the world in which we must find for understanding. We are in the world in which we must find for emotions. Central banks are hated as pretty much everybody else from the elites by segments of population, and we need to try to address this directly and not just with increasing the competence and understanding. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Miroslav. Emma, over to you.
So Cecilia covered off the main reasons why I think many central banks are pushing towards a more plain language approach to many of their communications, and I won't cover off those too much. I think the hangover of the financial crisis certainly left us with a very different population we were talking to in terms of their expectations of us as central banks. In the UK, we certainly saw something that was touched upon this morning, which was a deficit in both trust and understanding. And there has been a generational shift in terms of how people receive information, how they engage with information. The march of social media is kind of one angle of this, but I think the risk of echo chambers and people hearing what they want to hear from the groups of people they are involved with is becoming more and more and more of a risk. Then, of course, in the United Kingdom, we have the specific challenges of Brexit and how that came about, and the arguments in the run-up to the Brexit vote, and then the never-ending argument since the Brexit vote. And I think that has highlighted perhaps a couple of issues in the UK, which may be relevant in other countries as well. But previously, technocratic institutions that were kind of above the fray, whether that was the civil service or the central bank or others, suddenly were brought very, very strongly into the fray and got a considerable amount of criticism. We also had an issue that we were perceived in a deeply partisan argument as being on one side and how do you try and tackle that? And of course, we have to continue to do our job in this environment, setting out the risks of policy, implementing policy, without getting pulled too much into some of those concerns. So for us, trying to build trust, understanding, engagement, which is where I think we start to get into the emotion point, through use of plain English, infographics, video, use of social media to reach people directly, was a kind of evolving 5-year program that we've embarked on. I'll just finish by saying, before we open questions, which is where I think the interesting aspect will be, is I've grown up in a central bank. I started in financial stability, I've moved through markets, I've worked in prudential regulation, and I've ended up in communications. And what really strikes me is we think about talking to the general public, whereas it's really notable in a central bank how different areas of a central bank can't even talk to each other always successfully in a language that they understand. So financial stability talks in tail risks in a way that always monetary policy people don't always understand, and vice versa. So I think we need to be honest with ourselves that by speaking the language we do within our walls, within our central banks, makes it very hard for people outside of our tribe to understand us. And the general public is just the biggest tribe. And in the United Kingdom, the general public is 60 million people, and you can't hope to reach all of those with one product or one way of writing. You have to segment your audiences, and you have to really concentrate. But I think there is a huge job that we have to do with each other and to do as part of the policy decision-making process to embed some of that plainer language and clearer messaging right the way through the process inside central banks to make communication outside central banks that much easier.
Thank you, and over to Dmytro, Sologub. Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to reflect on several lessons and from the National Bank of Ukraine experience. I mean, on our building communications efforts in the last 5 years. I mean, we actually always happy to share our experience in communication building with other central banks, but actually we do not wish them to go through the same challenges we had in the last 4 years, I want to say. And honestly, when we say about kind of whether central banks should open up, whether they should talk to the public, honestly, we didn't have much choice. It was very much a question of survival. I mean, you know, facing a very unique combination of political and economic challenges. I mean, there was kind of really no much other option, right? I mean, we have had a very difficult environment first. We also had actually, and still I would say, facing a situation of a general, strong, embedded distrust in the institutions. They're very much what I call a personality bias, when people tend to see personalities, not institutions. That's what very much environment we started. I mean, I think the lesson we also had on the positive side, that actually was mentioned by Cecilia, a very good phrase, the crisis is too good opportunity to be wasted. That's very much the point. As we also started very much from scratch, we had no any legacy behind. That, I think, could be a problem for central banks. When you did in the past something and then there is discussion, okay, why economy is more or less okay, people probably understand us, we don't know, we didn't measure it, but probably it's okay because we're not bumped into the streets. I mean, nobody is fighting us, so what else, why we need to change? I mean, again, for us, it was very much a clean sheet. We had to start from clean sheet. And therefore, I mean, honestly, and I think that's very much still a lesson I have, we should be open-minded. Even if we do something now and it works, it doesn't mean that it should work tomorrow. So as you know, past performance is not a guarantee of future profits, right? So to be open-minded, I think, is important for communications of the central bank. I think the lesson we have, the important one, and why now we feel, I would say, stronger and, let's say, more sure about our policies, is systemicness of communications. We didn't actually get it immediately. There was a lot of internal discussion, internal fights, I would say, I mean, what to do, especially in the time when things were pretty sore in the economy. But I think systemicness, when you go from planning to execution and then to assessment, is really the thing which is very much holding our policy and our communications together now. Also, I mean, what is also definitely important is to use, try to use new channels. Yes, I think there we, as the governor also demonstrated today with Twitter and so on. That's, I mean, we need to reach people. It's pretty clear. Again, there is no much other choice. You know, there is a motto of the central bankers, especially in a transparent inflation targeting framework. Do what you say what you do, and also I can add, say what you do and repeat, repeat, repeat. Thank you.
Thank you. And Yuriy, after a round of central bankers or former central bankers, what's academia say?
Thank you. Let me start with making this observation that political pressure, populism, central banks, this is a usual combination. We had this for many, many centuries. Kings, presidents, parliaments always had temptation to tinker with money, have a little bit more inflation, to have a better economy, have better chances to be reelected. So this wave of populism is maybe unusual in some ways, but in a historical perspective, we always had this pressure, and the society was always trying to come up with ways to limit this pressure in certain ways. For example, gold standard was one response to this political pressure to print money as much as the head of the state would like to have. Now we have a new way to handle this. It's called central bank independence. But it is a man-made institution, right? So the parliament decided to establish a central bank independence. It can equally take it away from the central bank. And the only reason why it's still there is because people see value in having central bank independence. They think it's a good idea. Now, what is value, right? People have to see value in the central bank independence. It's not going to be value that is perceived by the financial markets or some professional forecasters who think that, the central bank is credible, you're going to deliver a certain inflation target. It has to be really voters. And so then the operation of the central bank, if it wants to preserve its independence, is really to create value for its customers, which is voters. It has to be, as Governor Smolny said, had to be a client-oriented operation. You have to talk to these people, you have to establish trust. How can you establish trust if people don't understand what you're doing, if there is an institution, what is the procedure, what is the objective, what is the benefit? I understand it's a huge exercise, but I think ultimately the central bank independence, central banks cannot win a war with the parliament. Parliament is a top institution. They can always, take away any kind of power, responsibility the central bank has. And so we have, you, you have to work with voters to make sure they understand your objectives, they understand your tools, the limits of your powers. If for some reason they decide to give you more powers to fight, some other crisis, certainly they should be able to do it, but they have to understand the value of central bank independence. And one brief thing I wanted to mention, it's not just a problem in Ukraine or some other countries. Carola Binder compiled this wonderful database of political pressure across many, many countries in the world. And what's clear is that political pressure happens in weak democracies, in strong democracies, in autocracies, everywhere. So it's a really universal phenomenon, and we should be prepared to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuriy. Many of you, in fact, all of you kind of touched on these political pressures, and certainly parliaments can always withdraw independence that was granted before. There are life cycles, in a sense, in independence. It can be reduced, it can be increased. But when attacks happen, as we see nowadays, if we look at the public debates, it's what's happening over the past few years. If central banks, in carrying out their mandates, are attacked by politicians, how should they respond? So, Miroslav, your view maybe fight and then ignore, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, I believe what helps is first build reserves in good times, or buffers, or however you call it. Like, for example, we for years had instead of kind of occasional communication with politicians, we had regular meetings with both chambers, economic and budget committees and stuff like this. So we had sort of regular communication, which always helps, because you get to know, and you have friends even in parliament. So to give you the clue, on value of this at the I would say peak of heat on central bank. I went on a regular mission to Parliament to defend our inflationary report, and it was simply approved by overwhelming majority. Period. And that's one thing. But second, I believe we must be clear also in crisis. Independence of central bank is here in order to allow it to do the acts that the majority of population may not agree with. That's why we have independence, and we must not be thinking about not using it when needs to be. So building buffers fine, but independence is here exactly because we may become unpopular because of our decision.
I think personally, if criticisms of the central bank are coming directly from Parliament or from parliamentarians, they need to be dealt with and discussed with and confronted. I don't think you can ignore them. They are ultimately the people we are responsible for. They are the elected representatives. Now, hopefully there are forums to do that in a way, whether that's a committee or a parliamentary hearing. I think where it gets harder is when it's kind of in the press or generally more diffuse, the pressure. I'm not a big believer in engaging in a fight on Twitter, for example. I don't think they work. I certainly know I've never been persuaded by someone coming in on a Twitter fight that you can see in front of you going, oh, that's a good point. Yes, that'll change my mind. It's kind of not how social media works. So I think if it's in a formal situation, personally, it is our duty to respond to that as central bankers. I think it's just more arguable when it's kind of out there in the social media world, exactly how you choose. If there are factual inaccuracies, that's one thing. I think if it's opinion, it's quite hard to basically say your opinion is wrong, ours is right, and you kind of get into you can get in quite a negative spiral.
Well, honestly, I would say parliamentarians are not my favorite client group to talk with. But we definitely are trying to do it in the central bank. Actually, there is actually official requirements for governor to report to the parliament on the annual basis. Apart from that, we try to engage with them as much as possible via finance and banking committee, individuals, meetings, and so on and so on. But actually, what is also important is to go behind politicians, because in democracy, politicians are representative of voters, right? So we should also, to win over politician minds, we should also win over voters' mind. And here I would like to reflect on the thing I mentioned before on personalities versus institutions. I mean, what we found that when we speak as an institution, especially about something in positive tone, we do not get much good traction or strong, let's say, support and so on. That's what we try to do. We go over this, and we try to talk as much as possible to the people in individual meetings, like in businesses, students, and so on. And there we see much difference. There we see that if people negatively react to the institution when something is posted on our official website, then when you come to them with a presentation, actually answering honestly very difficult questions from time to time, they very much appreciate that. And I mean, it's not a kind of a political campaign. We always admit that we are not campaigning here for central bank to be a governor, to be a next president. We just would like really to explain what we are doing and have a very sincere discussion. And I would say from our experience, this thing works.
You know, I'll start again with an observation that if somebody attacks Bundesbank now in Germany, that will be the end of a political career, because the Bundesbank has such a reputation that, you know, it kept inflation low when every other country had high inflation. It survived through so many political pressures. It's an institution very much cherished in Germany. So in a way, the best response is to establish reputation, and you can avoid any kind of fight. But, you know, once you're in a fight, and it's probably unavoidable at some point in time, you know, since I'm a university professor, I believe in education and, you know, talking to people, making the case that, you know, certain trade-offs are available out there. We have to make tough choices, and, you know, given the available options, we may choose something which is not the best option, but it's certainly not the worst. And then, you know, hopefully we can convince the general public that, you know, what we did was a reasonable decision, and see what happens.
Thank you, and maybe one more question before we turn to our audience. Yuriy, you mentioned Bundesbank. Indeed, it appears that there is a strong political consensus in Germany that independence of Bundesbank is not open for discussion. which is wonderful. But many years ago, when Bundesbank law was still discussed, it was a long fight to make sure that independence, high degree of independence included in Bundesbank law, and central bank at the time, Banker Deutsche Länder, fought a lot to make sure that independence envisaged in this law. And they took it to the press, and they monitored public debate, and they were very active in this fight for a number of years. So since also it was discussed by many speakers today, and it seems to be clearly the task for central banks all around the world, this taking their views to the public and addressing public at large, beyond not only maybe parliaments, but also beyond media, talking to people directly. So how do you see central banks investing in these efforts, and from your experience, what should be the focus of this? It's not a trivial task, as we discussed, simplifying the language, technical language of central banks, and at the same time trying to raise maybe understanding and general literacy of audiences, of broader audiences. It's a long-term investment, and it's a significant investment. So do you think that has prospects, as was quoted by our colleague from Banque de France, that this probably will not succeed, this effort, Blender said in 2017. Do you think it will succeed? Do you think people will come to understand central banks a little bit better, and should central bank invest in this effort?
Well, I really believe on a bottom line, the question is whether you can explain the big banking models to the general public. And honestly, the answer is no. I mean, there's no chance to explain it to the man on a street, sorry. So one thing is to try to communicate clearly what you are doing now and why. But I do not believe that the fact that central banks are essentially here to complete the free market with a significant share of private banks creating their own money can be explained to the public. So there are limits, there are clear limits.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I don't think part of the work that we're doing is really about just explaining absolutely everything central banks done, from money market operations through to in-depth micro regulation. Ultimately, it's about your key policy effectiveness that the public needs to understand. So whether that's anchoring expectations, whether that's the launch of a new note, whether that's trying to prevent a bank run in the case of financial instability, there are core aspects of central banking that you need to try and increase the awareness, the understanding, the engagement with, and ultimately trust in. I don't think you try and explain quite indulgently a lot of the work that goes on in central banks that they don't need to understand. I think a bit like Cecilia's plane analogy, I don't need to understand all the physics of flying a plane. I need to understand some core aspects of it, but not absolutely everything. So for me, the kind of simplification of language and the trying to reach the public is first and foremost about policy effectiveness. Legitimacy and independence is secondary. It is, can we make our policies more effective through the general public having a greater understand of aspects of them?
Well, and basically in my first days as a central banker, I got advice from one of my colleagues who is actually in this audience. He said, when you talk to people, you should imagine you talk to your mom and dad. And actually I tried it a few times with my mom. Works, but not so good. Anyway, I mean, yes, to go through and try to explain all mechanics again. I mean, I, for example, don't understand how computers work, right? Whether I need to, no. But I mean, it's just working, right? Therefore, the same is here. I mean, but then if you talk about things which are directly affecting people's lives, then you need to explain, yes? And there is no other way forward. It's pretty clear. And actually, from our experience, when we try to talk to all this audience I discussed, I mean, on the personal level, What I see, it's easier. The challenge I see for us and probably for other central bank is to talk in plain language to general public in institutional setups through inflation report, financial stability report, and so on. Because when you directly interact with the audience, you can very much adjust your language to the level of your audience and so on. When you have a report, institutional report, your flagship report to be published, there it should be very much generalized for all kind of audiences. And that's not easy. And then again, the question of investment, right? Whether you should produce one inflation report for that group and another for that group. I mean, that's then the issue of very much efforts and investment in this.
Okay, so I would like to continue with this observation that the central bank has to create a value which is appreciated by the voters. All right, and so if we want to create value, we have to learn something from private businesses or from political parties that face competition. They have to differentiate their product. They want to make sure they have a reputation. And so that means that, you know, if the central bank wants to create a brand, right, a reputation, a value for the general society, they have to invest a lot more in the communication. And this means you have to talk to all sorts of people. As Emma said, you have to segment the population and have different messages for different people. The same was said by Governor Smiley. You look, for example, at commercials for Coca-Cola or BMW. It's not the same message in every country. It's not the same message for every group. It's very targeted, it's very creative. I think we can learn a lot from that. We may disagree about, you know, the value of having Trump in the White House, but he certainly taught us that he can clearly communicate super simple messages to the general public and achieve amazing results. And it's not just him. You can look at, you know, Berlusconi in Italy or Franklin Roosevelt. He made a revolution by appealing to the people directly through radio, by bypassing conventional media. His fireside chats were amazing in terms of explaining major policies in a language which is really accessible to the general public. For example, when he introduced the Social Security Administration, it was one of his fireside chats, he did not use a single number. Okay, it was very, very clear language. It was very relational. Something that Eric described, it was like, imagine yourself in such and such situation. This is what the policy is going to do for you. I think we can learn from this kind of experiences and improve communication. Also, you know, we discuss a lot about, you know, alternative policy tools, management of inflation expectations. How can you manage expectations if people don't pay attention to you? The paper today by Michael Umler suggested that, you know, a third of people know or heard something about the central bank actions. The Bank of England had a survey of households around the time when quantitative easing was implemented. 80% of people never heard of that. That's not going to be an effective, you know, tool. And to the extent consumers control 60–70% of GDP and they don't react to the news, then the effectiveness of central bank communication is basically zero.
I would like to add one thing. What makes the communication of central bank especially tricky is that everybody has money. I mean, like if you compare central banker to designer, to engineer of Boeing 737 MAX, yeah? Which is not a really great story of engineering, I believe. But nobody really thinks he can design Boeing 737 MAX software. Yeah? But everybody has money. Everybody feels he understands money, and everybody feels he understands the central banking jobs. I got numerous letters from especially lawyers and heads of surgical departments telling me what we should do. Yeah? Because they have money. I mean, like everybody feels he or she has money, and that makes it especially complicated to communicate because people simply feel them being experts on money themselves, and we should keep this in mind.
Thank you to all our panelists for contributions to this, for their contribution to this discussion, and then we will now open the floor for questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the panel. My name is Andrew Blinov. I work for the National Bank of Ukraine, chief expert, coordinator of the expert platform. It's like a center of excellence. So my question is exactly about this. So when we say fight, it's not boxing. So we're not speaking about the broken heads or like fists or even courts. We're saying about finding the arguments, explaining what the central bank is doing, why, and by what means it is working. You said a lot about the official communications, but I'm asking about non-official communications, jogging, blogging, viral video, different non-official expertise. We know we have the bank underground within the Bank of England. We have different centers of excellence within Lithuanian, Slovenian central banks or finance ministries, training centers. So what's your opinion about the different channels? If you say about the transparency and about to make the statements clear exactly to the wider public, how switching from official to non-official communication helps from your experience? Thanks.
So, would you like?
Well, first, I believe the first time police was to protect Fed from the mob was somewhere around 1910 in banking crisis, so it might be about boxing. Saying this, I believe what matters is that as much ideal everybody has the access to the same message at the same time, and then effectiveness of a channel is to be compared as I said, in our experience, blogging worked very well.
I'm not sure I really understand the unofficial point. I mean, Bank Underground isn't unofficial in the sense that it's bank staff writing. It's not sanctioned by the governors, but it's still quite technical and quite specific. It has a particular aim, that channel. One of it is to broaden debate and to try and demonstrate the bank is more comfortable with debate than perhaps it has been in the past. I think if you start to talk about softer forms of communication, like direct outreach, when you go out and talk to people, not on a script, but you're having a conversation, education centres, education policies in general, when you just start to, they can be incredibly powerful, but outreach can also be incredibly expensive because you can only speak to a relatively small number of people in the room or via that way. But I think with digital media, and you start to look at the ability to do some of that stuff online, like we were seeing earlier with the governor doing his chats on Twitter and things like that, you start to get at trying to make that reach bigger than just having a conversation. I mean, the most powerful is always personal interaction, but obviously there's not enough people to go and talk to everyone, so you kind of have to look at ways of doing that more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with them. I mean, fortunately, Ukraine is a big country, and we cannot go over 40 million people and to directly interact with them. So we still need to have some kind of intermediaries. But actually, as I said at the beginning, I mean, we remain open-minded about that, I think. And then the project Andrei is heading in the central bank is very much about that. We also would like to be, let's say, outspoken and vocal about the things we see in the economy, but also empower our people in the bank to talk about the things and so on, and try maybe to be it in simpler language and so on. I think, again, I mean, open-mindedness is important. If somebody tomorrow brings me a new idea and says it would work, and I definitely would have a feeling it would work, we would do it. I mean, I don't know, there was a question about Instagram that I think we already discussed it during the lunch. Maybe that would be a next important point.
You know, I agree we cannot talk personally to each and everyone in the economy, but this is why we have newspapers, this is why we have Facebook, this is why we have Twitter, and maybe we will not have a personal touch for everybody, but, you know, given the way the technology progresses, we can really personalize a lot of stuff we try to convey to people. And again, we can learn from businesses how they do this. They really have very, very targeted messages. For example, you look at the profile of a person on Facebook, you can know a lot about this person, and you can have a specific message, you know, really tailored message for this person. You can, you know, reach out to lots and lots of people at relatively cheap prices. Also, I wanted to mention that, you know, it's true, I don't want to make it sound that households are completely stupid and they're hopeless and, you know, it's zero chance. No, we're not going to say it, no. But, you know, one thing we can do in many ways. For example, the ECB has this wonderful video, it's a short YouTube cartoon, 8 minutes maybe, which explains how inflation works. You know, and they use this inflation monster, taking away purchasing power. You know, it's really not for, you know, people in this group, but for general population, I think it's a very simple, very easy, very concentrated in time a way to understand what's going on with inflation and why inflation and deflation are equally bad, and that's why, you know, the ECB is trying to achieve a kind of a balance between these different forces and target 2%. Again, we can be very creative in this. We don't have to kind of use old technology.
Thank you. And next question, yeah.
Clement Graffer from Goldman Sachs. I have a very specific question for a specific audience that is but close to the heart of everybody here, which is research and academic research. How should central banks actually communicate or discuss new ideas with the academic world? Should they just see themselves as executioners that basically have a job to do, or should they drive that debate? And to which extent does that potentially basically an active discussion of the executive of a central bank basically obscure basically the job that they do after, because it becomes more difficult for people like me to interpret what they're actually really trying to say?
Well, maybe for a change we will start with our representative from academia.
All right, so I'll start with an observation that it is really difficult to deal with central banks when you get to talk about research with them in many ways, because, you know, academia research is all about breaking rules, and the central banks are not very good at breaking rules. However, there are many, many fruitful ways to have a cooperation. For example, the paper this morning is, I think, a great example of what academics can teach to central bankers. You can write a very complicated inflation report, which takes, you know, 15 years of education to understand, so a handful of people will have a grasp what's inside and what it means. Or you can have a much simpler message. You know, we have research, Michael Weber, me, and Olga, when we show that simple sentences, when you just tell people, look, inflation was such and such number, and then see how people react to this information. And you can see that just, you know, one sentence, really one tweet, can move expectations by a mile. So we can learn a lot from these experiments. We should be really creative in finding new ways. And, you know, maybe in a way, the central banks, if they don't want to do this dirty work themselves, they can fund the research. We will do the dirty work, find what works. And then, you know, once we have this, they can take it over, and, you know, maybe it will be a successful program.
Well, we actually try to do some dirty work internally to have research people within the central bank. And actually, I would say there is also a communication problem. On the one side, the policymakers are not technical enough to understand researchers. On the other side, researchers are not good enough in communications. But I mean, that's not an irresolvable problem. Yeah, I mean, what we really try to do and establish, let's say, a consistent process and also regular process. Yeah, I mean, when research people are trying to explain, that's actually, I think, when we discussed at the board meeting, that it's good to have a research internally and they produce a good research, but then they should reach out to the policy departments and try to explain and very much propagate their research results to the policy people who are in the policy front. Yes, I think, I mean, there, I think this would be really mutually beneficial, both for research people, because they see that their research could be applied, and for policy people who get a stronger academic backing for their policy decisions.
Central banks are ultimately policy institutions. They may have, to a lesser or greater extent, internal researchers, and we do in the Bank of England, but I think we have to reach out and work with those outside, because ultimately that's where most of the cutting edge thinking will be done. And I think it's particularly important to do that on topics that aren't standard, long-standing, kind of monetary policy type topics. So where central banks are starting to move into greater understanding about the financial markets, green finance, fintech, they're going to have to try and help drive that forward, because they won't be able to keep that internally, and nor should they, because they are ultimately there to implement policy, and it will be academics that need to drive that forward. How they do that and the way they do that, given their risk averseness and probably lack of desire or even ability to share data, etc., which I know becomes issues in terms of how you can work on that with sensitivity and all that, is somewhat difficult. But I think they should. We have something called the One Bank Research Agenda at the bank, which we try and go out and say, these are the topics we're interested in, please come and work with them on us. Then, of course, we run into some technical difficulties sometimes, how you can make that work, but I think it's a good intention.
Well, first, I think there's a big difference between the way central bank should work with academia in countries like UK or US, which simply attracts enough people in academia on its own sort of profit-loss line. And countries, even like Czech Republic, not to mention Ukraine and others, in which central bankers, I believe, duty is to support research. Let me just, Czech National Bank, despite we have CERCI, probably one of the best graduate research centers in sort of New Europe. Despite this fact, central bank is the second most important scientific institution measured by simple quotation index, and I believe this is right. And the way is to support the research through cooperation with quality institution, preferably through some grant system, which is open to everybody, but of course most of the grant money will end up in capable hands from the most capable institutions. But I really believe there's sharp difference of doing this in sort of strong academia, independent academia country and sort of New Europe.
And I think I saw a question from the lady at the back, and I will maybe take like 3 or 4 questions, and we will have a final round of comments. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying the panel. My question is about, I mean, we're talking about central banks kind of being pushed by politicians to push monetary policy in a certain direction. But what do you do when your very mandate is kind of being extended? Especially in developing countries, we're being asked more and more to play a more active role in economic growth. Beyond maybe monetary policy. For example, in Uganda, we have an agricultural lending program that the central bank is now doing, and I know Nigeria has a similar program. In Nigeria, the central bank also has to do like entrepreneurship training and set up centers to train people on how to be entrepreneurs. So there's this call and push for central banks to be more actively involved in economic growth. Is this I mean, how much can you do? How are you allowed to say no? What can you say? Please let us focus on our mandate of inflation, monetary and financial stability. I mean, we saw from the financial crisis, I guess developing countries also had to take on the macroprudential regulation, and maybe that's experience you can draw from. But what do you think when the populists are calling for central banks to extend their mandate?
Thank you, and maybe we'll take 2 or 3 more questions, and then if there are more questions. Sorry. Yeah.
I wasn't.
Okay. So we will have to. Maybe we will take yours and then yours.
I wasn't gonna ask a second question, but since there was none, so just to make a distinction. So when we talk about central bank independence, we should also make a distinction between goal independence and operational independence. In many cases, especially after the global financial crisis, to avoid the democracy gap, people tend to argue that the goal independence is not really something that's appropriate. And in many cases, including Bank of England, medium-term operational targets of the numerical targets of the central banks are actually determined by governments or in coordination with the Treasury or ministries. So I wonder, what, you know, in this case, and it also goes to the question for developing countries. I mean, first of all, in many cases, independence, operational independence is defined for monetary policy specifically. also in Bank of England, and maybe not in other functions. So how that might blur the fight aspect of it. And secondly, maybe you can fight in Bank of England or in Bundesbank, where judicial and media independence is very strong. But maybe when it comes to developing countries, you have really less means to fight. Thank you.
Yes, please, at the end of that side of the room.
So I just wanted to touch on, to answer the question, there's a nice sort of paraphrasing of Winston Churchill, which is, sometimes it's better to choose to fight when you have a chance of winning than be forced to fight when you have no chance at all. And I sort of think we're at that point. And, the thing that I think keeps coming up is this issue of education. And it's a really interesting issue for central banks to think about, because I don't think there's any lack of interest. I mean, we all know what I always call barstool economics or cab driver economics. Everybody knows the problems and most people think they know the solutions. But the big question is, who's responsible for providing that education? And I think economics as a profession, we actually do a pretty bad job of taking advantage of people's inherent interest in economics. So if you think about it, like, what do TV documentaries come out about? They come out about nature programs and black holes and loads of other things. Other fields have a much better way of feeding people's interest and creating real wonder about this stuff. I mean, Stephen Hawking's book sold millions and millions of copies about black hole theory. It's not obvious that interest rates and macroprudential and the way the economy works shouldn't be much more important. But I do get worried to think that central banks are going to take it upon themselves to do all of the education. There surely has to be a bigger reform of education. I mean, you can finish school in the UK and Ireland without ever learning what an interest rate is. You'll know how to calculate the volume of a cone, but you won't know what an interest rate is. And almost everybody will someday have an interest rate determined product in their life. But I do think that the one bit where central banks can do something, and this is where I think the stuff that the Bank of England is doing at the moment with town halls, is listening is not going to change policy, I think, Carola, your question earlier. But by listening, you can find out where the real gaps in knowledge are, and you can start to target them. Because, as Emma was saying, the resources for central banks to provide education are very limited, and therefore need to be incredibly targeted.
Is this a comment or a question? And if it's a question, what's the question?
Yes.
All right, thank you for your contribution then. And there was a question also. I saw a hand, gentleman there.
Yeah, I'm sorry to steal the floor from others with yet another question, but I just find that topic so interesting. The Economist titled some time ago, about a month ago, I think, that the central bank independence is under threat worldwide, basically in many different countries, ranging from the US via the UK to India, and I think many people would subscribe to this even in Austria. So my question is, do you agree with the statement, with this worry, and do you also agree with the scenario that the Economist basically draws up, that what is at risk is a high inflation scenario from the 70s if those threats materialize? Thank you.
Yeah. So we have 3 questions, and maybe I will ask you to kind of comment on them as you see fit, where you would like to focus more or less, what you feel more comfortable. I think we start with the first question about goal and operational independence. You remember the question, right? And then we'll take others as well.
Well, on extended mandate, I would be pretty pragmatic. Unless it forces the central bank to print so much money that it pushes the country in higher inflation with no fiscal means, I wouldn't be that. I would fight against it, but I would be doing it diligently. And I have my own personal experience with small loan providers regulation and similar things from Czech Republic. We were always unhappy to get it, but quite frankly, those are small issues. But if it forces you to increase the supply of money by 10%, I would be worried. Yeah? As to goal and operational independence, first, I'm I'm a little bit skeptical on the statements underlying the question. Yeah, I really believe that the most developed Anglo-Saxon world central banks are time to time pretty supportive to policies of politician groups they approve. It was seen in loan making for minorities that preceded this crisis. I'm not perfectly sure that we will not err with the rules and regulations for a green financing in future. I really believe the one thing is to support environment, and second thing is to support through the means of financial institution regulation green projects. Yeah? I believe this is dangerous. And last, on education, we can only support the statement, but my last comment on independence in other countries, I believe in Czech Republic or Slovakia, for that sake, the central banks are quite independent and it's well ingrained in society. But if there would be a goal setting by populist politicians, don't believe that that would lead to hyperinflation. No, that would lead to goals like minus 5% inflation every year, because you are talking conservative savers mentality societies, or at best zero inflation, which is itself pretty dangerous goal as such. So I wouldn't worry about hyperinflation if populists take over central banks. I would worry about deflationary episodes.
Perhaps I'll just touch a little bit on Michael's education point, actually, because I think it fits to remit and it fits to kind of what we've been asked to do as well. So I think it touches on a number. So we have set up an education program in the United Kingdom. The Bank of England have. We have launched a set of syllabus materials for 11 to 16-year-olds. They are aligned to something we have in the UK called the national curriculum. Now the issue in the UK is teachers have a limited number of hours in the day and their syllabus is very full, teaching everything else that is in the national curriculum, from areas of cones through to Macbeth. So you kind of have to fit in that, and it's not ideal because it's not a core part of the curriculum, but it is part of the curriculum economics teaching, but very few children do it. So it's part of something called PSHE, which means it fits in with lots of other issues about social health and things like that. However, the demand is there. So we have launched these materials, they are free, and over 1,600 schools have downloaded and are using them, which is a third of all schools in the United Kingdom. And that's way above what a lot of teachers we work with said we would get in terms of downloads. Now, this isn't financial literacy, that is different. Our remit is to help explain the economy and how it fits together. Now, obviously, there are areas of interest rates, etc. in that, but financial literacy is looked after by other bodies in the United Kingdom, and that's where I think it's important to keep on remit that you're asked to do, and keep it quite tight, but not be afraid if that remit changes, as long as you get the resources and the experience in order to meet that changing remit. As long as you keep to remit, then I think, I mean, you know, we took on macroprudential in 2014, and that was a challenge, but it was something that we kind of had to make work once you have responsibility. But I think education is a great way of outreach that's relatively cheap compared to general adult type town hall outreach.
I actually would like to reflect on the several questions in one message, because I think the questions about extended mandate, goal versus instrumental independence, and central bank independence in general, they could be very much seen as sides of the same thing. Because, first of all, I mean, what is the main goal of the policymakers? I mean, to maximize the well-being of economic agents. And then it means you should not be dogmatic there, yeah? If our friends from academia would show us that there is another regime where central bank could be really dependent, let's say, or could be even non-existent, but that would maximize the well-being of the people, then, I mean, why should we be dogmatic about that, right? Me and Yuriy were in a very good Bank of Canada conference last year, which actually discussed the future of inflation targeting, and there were academic ideas throwing around and so on, but honestly, I, as a policymaker, did not find the answer that there is any other regime working now better than inflation targeting, right? But again, the central banks should be pragmatic, as Miroslav said, and not dogmatic, yeah, if there's something, things like that emerging. But on the other side, when we talk about extended mandate, it doesn't mean that you should be pure inflation targeting and so on. again, you should be open-minded about that, yes? Because basically, I mean, that's actually what we are now thinking about, yes? Of course, we have this mandate of price stability, and especially in the first iteration, when you're just an emerging inflation targeter, that's important to anchor the expectations of economic agents around that. But then, I mean, we are living in the complex world, and there are a lot of other things there. And indeed, I mean, we as a central bank, even within limits of our independence, I mean, should think professionally and conceptually about how we can contribute to stable inflation expectations, to promoting sustainable economic growth in the country. Maybe we can extend our mandate and try to think in whether to try to assist and develop, let's say, just an example, yeah, small and medium, lending to small and medium enterprises and so on, so on. But within the mandate of central bank independence and inflation targeting, what is important. That's actually about central bank independence. Again, I mean, if it would be proven that central bank independence is not the best way to maximize, I mean, welfare, be it. Goal versus instrumental independence. Very interesting question. Look, I mean, with global financial crisis, why we're discussing now these communications and so on? Because the central banks have been very much on the front line fighting this economic crisis, yes? Before they were humble technocrats, bureaucrats, and so on, and now they are in the front line. That also actually puts them at the line of fire from the politicians, from the households, and so on. And then there is a question. You have an independent institution, which is technocratic, yes, but it actually very much take all power away for dealing with economic crisis from elected authorities, and that creates a problem. We might consider us smart people, but we have not been elected. And that's a problem in democracy, right? When the institution which was not elected is very much running the show. And therefore, I actually, I mean, sympathetic about this discussion between goal and instrumental dependence about accountability of the central bank, yes? Even if you have brightest technocrats in the world, they should be accountable. I think that's a very important point.
I would like to, Dmitry said that the key kind of message has to be repeated again and again to make sure people understand this. I want to repeat what Emma and Michael McMahon said, that education is probably the best way to make sure people understand the value of central bank independence. They will resist temptation to take it away. Now, in the first best situation, it would be the Ministry of Education or somebody who will tell teachers, look, you have to allocate more hours, but if this is not available, then we have to think about costs and benefits of doing this education in a second best way. And again, referring to this video from the ECB, you can create a curriculum which is easily accessible at zero cost, available for free, anybody can teach it. Maybe you can do instructions to teachers who are potentially interested in this. I think this is where the highest return is going to be, because if you think about the alternatives, if you have to spend billions and billions of dollars or pounds on rescuing something which is, I guess, a byproduct of financial illiteracy and this kind of things, and on the other hand, you can spend the same, maybe a fraction of this money to improve the education, then it's clear that the trade-off should be education, not rescuing people who didn't understand what kind of contracts they signed.
Yes, just two quick comments from me. Today's students, tomorrow's politicians. If they get it since their school years, the value of independence and proper policies and whatnot, that would help. And that also maybe speaks to consensus that seems to be apparent in Germany on Bundesbank independence. Bundesbank has been investing for many years in educational programs. For many, many years, that maybe pays off now. And second quick question on the threats to central bank independence that we see in many countries around the world, indeed. And yes, it's a concern, I think. We also see that some other central banks moving right opposite directions, and they are gaining independence as we speak, and they are supported by their societies and their governments. Just to mention just one, Central Bank of Jamaica, Bank of Jamaica is supporting these efforts very strongly. So it's different in different countries, these trends, based on economic history and cultural and legal tradition, where these countries stand at the moment. We have time maybe for one or two more questions from the audience, and then we will wrap up this discussion. So please let me know, raise your hands if you would like to ask another question. Yes, please, Christoph.
My name is Chris Jeffrey from Central Banking Publications. I'd like to ask a question. We were talking earlier about Yuriy on the way that Trump can get a very short message across and be very, very effective. So I'd just like to ask some of the panelists, if you had to manage a Trump tweet storm, how would you do it? So if you have a populist leader who is attacking the central bank as an institution through social media like Twitter, how would you combat it?
If there would be some factual untrue, I would probably correct it on Twitter. All comments I would leave to public. I hope I'm clear.
And I think I'd probably do exactly the same. I mean, ideally, all the things we're talking about today in terms of building public understanding, greater awareness, greater engagement, kind of helps you in the sense that you can pull on that in time if someone's criticising you, but in terms of actually having to confront something like that, you won't win. So I think, again, kind of keeping your interactions to political dialogue through official channels and then kind of buttressing the support more broadly with a greater understanding and trust in your policies is the best way that you can tackle that.
Perhaps I believe I have first-hand experience with similar kind of a country leader. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if tweet back is not an option, then I would think, I mean, basically the way Fed is now doing, Jay Powell and his colleagues are now doing, I think it's pretty much professional. You just do your job, you explain it, and that's it. I mean, I think, as Miroslav, I also could say, we didn't have a tweet storm, but we had a TV storm and a lot of other storms. Facebook storm and so on. I mean, we just try to explain, do our job, and I think, I mean, in terms of anti-crisis communication, I mean, trying and using a lot of techniques dealing with that. Yeah. So, I mean, but I think what is important is definitely not take it to personal level. I think that's what's very important for central bankers.
I would say, I will start with a comparison. Trump has 60 million followers. The Fed has 500,000. You cannot win this war in Twitter. Okay, so what this means is that you have to take this battle somewhere else where you can win this. And it may be some other media space, it may be Congress, Parliament, or something like this, but it's very clear. For example, somebody made a comment that the Central Bank of Sweden has 59 people on Instagram. There is no war there, right? You already lost. And so, you know, it takes a lot of time and infrastructure to build, you know, a follower base, so that, you know, in the future nobody will even try to attack you because, you know, you have a big bazooka and, you know, somebody strikes you, you can strike even stronger back.
What's another interesting thing about Twitter, though, is not so much perhaps the populist war element that we're talking about here, the fight element, but it's also a really good way of listening about issues that are bubbling up. So an example we had in the UK was when we launched our polymer notes, there was something that appeared on social media first, before it appeared in the media, about concerns that they contain meat byproducts in terms of impact on vegans. Now, if we'd have waited for that to get into the media, we would have been kind of behind the curve in terms of a response. And although there is a lot of noise on social media, there's also, you can sense when there are issues kind of bubbling up. And that's a really useful thing, I think, with the listening hat on rather than the speaking hat, is what are people concerns? From that, for example, we design our guides on our knowledge bank around the main topics people are asking. What are they putting in Google search? Are they looking for interest rates? Are they looking for price rises? Are they looking for unemployment? Are they looking for exchange rate? It's incredibly interesting information from social media. So it has a real positive impact as well as the kind of aspect you say in terms of a fight. It really helps us kind of target what we choose to do some of those more foundational educational guides and information on, because it tells you what people are interested in.
All right, thank you so much. It was wonderful discussion. Thank you all, and a round of applause to our speakers. I believe, if I am not mistaken, I will have the pleasure of announcing next panel, right? Coffee? Our guest, our host is absolutely right. It's a pleasure of announcing coffee break.